Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. It was already raining when I turned off the main road and onto the narrow, winding path that led to the cabin. The tires of my car hissed across the wet gravel, headlights slicing through mist that clung to the trees like a second skin. I rolled the window down slightly, letting in the scent of pine, wet earth, and something older, like wood soaked in memory. The lake wasn't yet in view, but I could feel its presence. Heavy, waiting, silent beneath the storm. The cabin appeared slowly, emerging from the fog like a memory half forgotten. It stood at the edge of the lake, its wooden frame weathered but upright, the windows dark, the porch sagging gently as if exhaling after too many years of silence. I parked the car and killed the engine. Only the rain remained, steady, unrelenting, tapping against the windshield like fingernails. The air smelled faintly of smoke and iron. I stepped out, feeling the chill of the wind wrap around me like something familiar. Inside, the cabin was warmer than I expected, though the scent of dampness clung to the walls. The light switch by the door worked, casting a soft yellow glow over the small living space. A fireplace sat unused, and in the far corner, a bookshelf sagged under the weight of dusty hardcovers. I dropped my bag by the couch and walked to the window. The lake, just barely visible through the trees, reflected nothing. Not the sky, not the cabin, not even the rain. The first night passed quietly at first. I made tea, lit the fire, and tried to settle into the silence. But around midnight, I heard it, a soft thump, then another, faint, rhythmic, coming from below the floorboards. I froze, holding my breath, counting the seconds between each sound. There was no basement listed in the rental description. I moved toward the hallway, every step amplifying the creak of old wood. The thumping stopped. The cabin exhaled again, found a narrow door at the end of the hall, painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible in the low light. It was locked. The knob didn't budge, and no key was in sight. I pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. Just silence, thick and waiting. I returned to the living room, but sleep didn't come easily. Every gust of wind against the walls felt like a whisper. And the rain? The rain kept falling, steady and slow, like it was counting down to something. I woke up late the next morning to gray light seeping through the curtains. The rain hadn't stopped. It tapped gently on the roof now, less insistent, but no less present. I moved through the cabin slowly, brushing my fingers across the old furniture as if expecting it to respond. In the kitchen, I found a weathered note pinned to the fridge. Please do not enter the locked door. Maintenance scheduled for next month. But the paper was yellowed, the ink faded. It hadn't been written recently. I spent the afternoon unpacking and trying to relax. Read a little, made a meal, walked along the muddy edge of the lake. There was something oddly peaceful about the quiet, but also off. The air never felt quite still. It was as if the forest and the lake were watching, listening, waiting for me to do something specific. I told myself I was imagining it, a side effect of isolation maybe. but when I passed by the back window and saw footprints in the mud that weren't mine, the peace fractured. The prints were faint but distinct, bare feet, small, leading from the woods to the porch and stopping just beneath the window where I had stood the night before. I followed them cautiously, but they vanished at the steps. No water on the porch, no mud on the boards, nothing. I waited for a reasonable explanation to appear in my mind, but none came. I returned inside and locked the door, telling myself it was just an animal. Still, I didn't sit with my back to the windows that night. As the second evening fell, the temperature dropped. I fed the fire and made another cup of tea. The cabin groaned more audibly now, wood shifting in the cold, or perhaps just remembering something it had held too long. I sat in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind whistle through the trees. Then, just after midnight, the thumping returned, this time slower, heavier. I stood and walked toward the hallway again. The door was still there, still locked. I pressed my hand against it. The wood felt warmer than it should have been, almost pulsing, like something behind it was breathing. A sudden creak from the floor made me step back. No movement, no voice. But in that moment, I realized the rain outside had stopped, completely. And in the silence that followed, I heard something far more unsettling than footsteps. Laughter, faint, childlike, from beneath the floor. I stumbled backward, heart racing. My breath caught somewhere between a scream and disbelief. The sound had been real. Soft, short, unmistakably a child's laugh. I stood frozen in the hallway for what felt like minutes, waiting for it to come again, to confirm what I thought I heard. But nothing followed. Only silence. No creak. No whisper. No wind. Just the deep stillness of the house, like it was holding something just out of reach. I returned to the living room without turning my back on that door. I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, the fire casting shifting shadows that danced like fingers across the walls. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, the result of fatigue, or the sound of water running through old pipes. But no matter how I reasoned, the feeling in my chest stayed, tight, electric. Something was under the cabin, and it had laughed. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The next day, I walked the perimeter of the cabin in the rain. I crouched near the foundation and looked for any indication of a crawl space, a vent, anything that might explain the sound. All I found were roots, slick stone, and waterlogged soil. No entrance, no hatch, just earth. And still, the faint sensation that someone, or something, was below, watching through the floorboards, counting my steps, measuring my silence. Called the rental agency from my car, hoping for some practical answer. A bored voice on the other end apologized for the outdated listing, but insisted the cabin didn't have a basement. It's just storage space beneath the floor, sealed up, the agent said. Nothing down there. Probably rodents, or plumbing noise. Happens all the time. I asked about the footprints, the laughter, silence on the other end. Then, maybe you should try another cabin, sir. I didn't respond. I just ended the call. That night, the storm returned harder than before. Thunder rolled across the lake like distant growling, and the rain hit the windows sideways. I sat by the fire, gripping the flashlight I had brought from the car. The door at the end of the hallway seemed darker now, as though the light refused to reach it. And as midnight crept in again, the laughter returned. This time not from beneath me, but directly behind the door. I stood slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip. The laughter had faded, replaced by a rhythmic tapping, like fingernails brushing the inside of the wood. I approached the door, each step stretching longer in my mind than in my body. My hand hovered over the knob, which now felt warmer than before, almost pulsing. I pressed my ear to the surface. No sound, no breath. Only the feeling that something on the other side was doing the same, waiting, listening. Without thinking, I whispered, "Who's there?" No reply came. Just a soft scraping sound, like fabric dragging across old stone. Then silence again. I backed away, not daring to look away until I reached the fireplace. I sat down and stared at the hallway, daring it to move, to shift, to reveal something. But nothing happened. The fire crackled gently, and the storm outside howled louder than before. I stayed awake until the sun returned, though the clouds never truly parted. In the gray light of morning, I inspected the door again. This time, something new. A faint handprint, child-sized, pressed into the wood at eye level. It hadn't been there before. The edges were damp. I ran my fingers across it, and the mark faded slowly, as though it had never wanted to stay. I told myself to leave, to pack my things and drive away. But something about the silence that followed the rain felt like a challenge, or a question, or a warning. I opened the guestbook on the side table, something I had ignored until now. A few names were listed, dated years apart. Most had left only initials, but one note, scrawled in hurried handwriting, caught my eye. Don't open the door, no matter what it sounds like. No signature, just that. A single warning, hidden in plain sight. The page after it was torn. That night, I placed a chair in front of the door and fell asleep on the couch again, fully clothed, the flashlight on my chest. I thought I heard the laughter once more, but it was fainter this time, less playful, more deliberate, as if it knew I was listening. And when the wind picked up outside, I thought I heard a voice carried with it, a whisper sliding through the cracks in the wall. You've already opened it. The rain had returned by morning, soft at first, then heavier, as if the sky had remembered what it wanted to say. I sat at the kitchen table with a half-full cup of coffee, staring at the hallway. The chair I'd wedged against the basement door was tipped over. I hadn't heard it fall. No noise in the night, but there it was, resting gently on its side, as if placed that way. I walked over, picked it up, and froze. The doorknob was damp. I ran my fingers across the metal. Cold, slick, unmistakably wet. And yet, the air inside the cabin was warm. Dry. There were no leaks in the ceiling. No water on the floor. I turned slowly and walked back to the table, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The coffee was already cold. I hadn't even taken a sip. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my notebook, the one I hadn't touched since arriving. I wrote down one line. The door wants to open. That afternoon, I wandered outside, raincoat pulled tight, boots sinking into the mud. I walked along the shoreline, letting the sound of the water calm me. The lake stretched out before me like a sheet of slate, flat and reflective. No fish, no movement, just water and fog. I stared across to the opposite bank. Trees blurred into gray. No sign of cabins, docks, or life. The world felt paused, like it was watching to see what I'd do next. I circled the cabin again, searching more thoroughly. Behind the structure, half buried in dirt and moss, I noticed a small rectangular vent. Metal, rusted, with narrow slats. A chill crept up my spine. I crouched, peering through. Nothing but blackness. But when I leaned closer, I thought I heard something. A faint knock. Then another, steady, measured, from inside the wall. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The buzz knock didn't repeat. That night, I dreamt of the door. I stood before it, bare feet on cold wood, hand reaching for the knob. In the dream, the hallway stretched impossibly long behind me, lined with windows showing endless rain. As I touched the door, it opened on its own. Inside was not a room, but a stairwell descending into complete darkness. I heard laughter again, only this time it was layered. Children, men, women, all laughing together, as if waiting to welcome me home. I woke drenched in sweat, the echo of laughter still ringing in my ears. The rain tapped steadily against the window, steady and soft like a heartbeat. I sat up on the couch, flashlight still beside me. The chair once again tipped over in the hallway. This time I hadn't moved it. I knew that for certain. My pulse quickened as I approached, and when I placed my hand on the doorknob, it felt warm again. Too warm, like it had been held from the other side. I returned to the kitchen and opened every drawer, searching for a key. Most were empty, except one that held a bundle of papers and a small wooden box. The box was plain, no lock, no decoration, but inside was a single brass key, old, tarnished, but still sharp along its teeth. I held it in my palm, weighing the choice. I could wait. I could leave. But the rain wasn't going to stop. And something about the silence in the cabin told me it never would. I stood in front of the door, key in hand. The air in the hallway felt thicker now, heavy like a closed attic. I inserted the key, and it turned easily. No resistance, no sound. The lock clicked open with a soft sigh. I hesitated, hand on the knob, and then pulled. The door creaked inward, revealing a narrow staircase descending into blackness. No light, no movement, just the smell of damp wood and earth, and beneath it, something else, sweet and rotten, like fruit left to spoil in a sealed box. I shone the flashlight down the stairs. They looked intact, if uneven, stone steps, not wood. The beam didn't reach the bottom. I stood there, unsure of what I expected. A voice, a figure, a gust of cold air. But nothing came. Only the steady sound of rain behind me, and a stillness below that felt ancient. I stepped down slowly, each footfall louder than it should have been, echoing like I was entering a place not meant to be found. The air grew colder as I descended. The smell intensified, earthy, moldy, like a forest buried beneath a house. Halfway down, my flashlight flickered, then steadied. I paused, listening. For a moment, I thought I heard movement, something small, shifting. A breath, a shuffle, but it stopped the instant I focused on it. I reached the bottom and stepped into a room the size of a cellar, walls made of stone, and shelves lining both sides. On the far wall, carved into the rock, were words barely visible beneath the mold. "We hear you." I stepped closer to the carved words, running the flashlight beam across the stone. The letters were uneven, like they'd been scratched with something crude, maybe a nail or bone. Beneath the phrase, I noticed dozens of small marks, tallies etched into the wall, each about the size of a finger. There were hundreds, maybe more. I raised my hand to trace one, and the wall felt warmer than the rest of the room, almost like it remembered being touched before. To the right of the carvings, a shelf held objects arranged with unsettling precision. A child's shoe, a broken compass, a glass jar filled with yellowed teeth. Each item was labeled in faded ink, names I didn't recognize, written in a trembling hand. My fingers brushed against a photograph, its corners curling. It showed the cabin from decades ago, surrounded by trees with no lake in sight. In the doorway stood a man with no face, just blurred shadow where eyes should be. A low creak echoed above me. I turned off the flashlight, instinct taking over. In the pitch black, I waited, ears straining. A long moment passed, and then came the sound of the basement door creaking closed, slowly, like someone pushing it shut with deliberate care. Then the lock. A soft click. My stomach turned cold. I was no longer alone. Something had waited for me to enter. And now, it had sealed me in. I backed away from the far wall, breath shallow, flashlight on again. The beam caught something new. A narrow opening in the stone near the floor, barely large enough to crawl through. A breeze moved through it, cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet leaves and something deeper. Movement flickered at the edge of the tunnel. I crouched low, listening. Nothing. But I could see the faint glint of something inside. Metal? Eyes? I wasn't sure. Then came the whisper, not from the tunnel, but from behind me. A voice, low and dry, spoken right beside my ear. "You opened it." I turned fast, the flashlight beam cutting through the room, but there was no one, only the shelf, the tallies, and the walls that now seemed to lean slightly inward. I stumbled toward the stairs and found the door still shut, the handle unmoving. The basement wasn't just a space, it was a mouth, and I had just stepped between its teeth. I leaned my weight against the door, jiggling the handle, but it wouldn't move. The lock held firm. I pounded once, twice, listening for movement above, for footsteps, for anything human. But the only sound was the faint dripping of water from somewhere deep inside the walls. The flashlight flickered again, then steadied. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think. If the tunnel led somewhere, I had no other choice. Staying meant waiting, and I wasn't sure who or what might come first. I dropped to my knees and crawled toward the narrow opening, its edges rough and damp. The stone scraped my shoulders as I pulled myself forward, the beam of the flashlight trembling with each movement. The air inside grew colder with every inch, until I could see my breath. The walls wept with moisture. Then, a sound ahead. Faint breathing. Not mine. Shallow. Raspy. I froze, heart hammering, unsure if the sound was real or echoing from somewhere inside my mind. I whispered, "Hello?" The breathing stopped. In its place came a slow, dragging sound, skin against stone. It moved toward me, unhurried, deliberate. I panicked and pushed backward, scraping my arms and legs as I fled the tunnel. My flashlight clattered across the floor and spun in circles, casting long, broken shadows across the walls. For a moment, I saw something at the tunnel's edge. Long fingers, pale skin, pulling back into the dark like a creature disturbed in its nest. I grabbed the flashlight and raced up the stairs, slamming my shoulder against the basement door. I shouted, kicked, begged, until, at last, the handle turned on its own. The door creaked open slowly. I didn't wait to question it. I burst into the hallway, slamming the door behind me, chest heaving. The cabin was quiet again. The fire had gone out. Only the sound of rain remained, soft and rhythmic, like applause for something unseen. I locked the door and dragged the heaviest piece of furniture I could find against it. Then I collapsed onto the floor, drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep, not even for a minute, because I realized something I hadn't dared to before. The door hadn't opened for me. It had opened by me. And what was beneath the cabin wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to get closer. The rain hadn't stopped, not once since that night in the basement. It shifted in rhythm, from gentle to urgent, but it never truly ceased. I spent most of the next day watching the window. I told myself I was just tired, that I needed sleep. But the moment I closed my eyes, I saw the tunnel, the stone, the fingers. I lit a fire early, just for comfort, though the room wasn't cold. I needed light. I needed distance from the dark under the floor. By evening, I hadn't left the cabin. I barely moved. I made coffee just to hear something boiling. I reread the Guestbook entries. Still the same warning. Still no signature. Just the impression that someone had once tried to tell me something and failed. Around dusk, I noticed the curtain in the living room had shifted. Not blown. Shifted. As if someone had been there, just inches from the glass. I checked the lock. It was still engaged. But the room smelled like lake water and wet leaves. I stood by the window for a long time, looking out at the forest beyond, the lake. The fog was heavier than usual, swirling low across the ground, rising up the trunks of trees like smoke. That's when I saw her, a figure, standing at the tree line, perfectly still. A woman in a long pale dress, unmoving, her face hidden by the low branches and drifting fog. She didn't flinch, didn't wave, just watched, as if she had always been there, waiting for me to finally look back. I blinked once, twice. She didn't vanish. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, the rain cold against my neck. The wind stirred the trees, but she didn't move. I took a step down the stairs. She was gone, not turned, not walked away, just gone, like the fog had swallowed her in a single breath. I stood there, letting the rain soak through my shirt, heart thudding in my ears. I felt like I had missed something important, like I had arrived too late to understand. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her. I replayed every detail in my mind, her posture, her stillness, the distance between us. It felt too specific to be imagination, too pointed. When midnight came, I closed all the curtains, locked every door and window. I sat by the fire again, the flashlight close. The cabin was quiet, until it wasn't. A sharp knock echoed through the living room, not from the door, from the window, the one I had just closed. I froze. Breath caught in my throat. The knock had been light, almost polite. 3 short taps. Then silence. I turned slowly toward the window, half expecting to see nothing. But the curtain had shifted again, pushed inward ever so slightly, as if someone had brushed it with their hand. I reached for the flashlight with shaking fingers and stepped closer, my footsteps loud in the otherwise still room. I held my breath as I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek through the gap. She was there, standing just inches from the glass. Her face was pale, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth closed in something too still to be called neutral. She didn't flinch when the light hit her, didn't react at all. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. When I looked again, she was gone. No footsteps in the mud, no splash in the puddles, just the slow return of falling rain, and the distant sound of something dragging across wet wood. I locked the window again, even though I knew it hadn't been opened. My skin buzzed with static, my body screaming to leave, to run, to get back in the car and drive until the trees disappeared behind me. But my legs didn't move. I sat in the armchair, gripping the flashlight, eyes fixed on the window. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell, and then I saw something new. A single handprint on the glass, from the inside. It was faint, but unmistakable. Small, slender fingers, as if someone had pressed their hand to the window in silence and waited. I didn't hear any doors open, didn't see a shadow cross the floor, but the air shifted, colder, heavier, filled with that same smell of lake water and old stone. I turned on every light in the cabin, one by one, until the rooms glowed in a tired yellow haze. I wanted to chase the darkness out, but it didn't leave. It watched. I didn't sleep. I sat up all night, jumping at every creak of the floor, every groan of the wind. The rain never stopped. Neither did the feeling that I was being watched, not from the woods, not from the lake, but from somewhere closer, somewhere inside. And when I finally moved to open the guestbook again, I found a new entry written in delicate handwriting. You saw me. Thank you. No date. No name. Just that. And below it, a wet leaf pressed flat between the pages. The leaf was still, damp, as if freshly plucked despite the book being closed. I stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to leave it untouched or throw it in the fire. In the end, I closed the guestbook and placed it under a stack of heavier books. I needed to believe that would keep it still. Outside, the fog had crept closer, thick and low, curling up the porch steps like fingers. I didn't open the door again that day. I didn't need to. I knew she was still nearby. That evening, I found myself walking in circles inside the cabin, checking the windows compulsively, listening to the rain and the occasional shift in floorboards. Around 10 o'clock, I passed by the hallway mirror and stopped cold. In the reflection behind me, the living room window was open, but when I turned to look, it was closed. Curtain untouched. I turned back to the mirror, still open, and in the reflection, a pale figure stood just outside, one hand pressed to the glass. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just watched as she slowly lifted her other hand and pointed, directly at the hallway, at the basement door. The reflection flickered, then steadied. She was still there, unmoving, waiting. I turned slowly toward the hallway, heart pounding. Nothing was there. The door was still locked, the chair still in place. But something inside me twisted. A sick certainty that whatever was beneath the cabin was no longer waiting to be found. It was watching too. I backed away from the mirror and covered it with a towel. The rain intensified, hitting the roof in fast, urgent patterns like fingers, tapping in code. I shut off the lights and lit the fire again, needing a flickering warmth. The shadows danced wildly on the walls, and for a brief second, I thought I saw her silhouette flicker there too. Tall, still, with long hair clinging to wet skin. The moment passed, but my chest stayed tight, like I had breathed something in that didn't want to leave. As midnight arrived, I sat alone in the glow of the firelight, waiting for something I couldn't name. The room was silent, except for the fire and the steady patter of rain. And then, from behind me, a whisper, gentle, dry, and spoken with impossible clarity. "Don't forget me again." I turned slowly, but there was no one there. Only the guestbook on the table, now open again, and the leaf gone. I approached the table cautiously, the fire's light flickering across the wood. The guestbook sat open to the same page, the ink of the message slightly smeared as if touched by wet fingers. Where the leaf had been, there was now a faint stain, a dark ring, like water or old blood. I flipped the page slowly. Another message had appeared beneath it. She never left the lake. I stared at the words, feeling the weight of them settle into my bones. Whoever had written this wasn't warning me. They were remembering. I grabbed the guestbook and placed it in the drawer beneath the sink, slamming it shut and wedging it closed with a heavy pan. I didn't want to look at it again. Didn't want to see more messages written in hands I didn't recognize. I paced for hours, stopping only to stare through the curtain now and then, half expecting to see her again beneath the trees. But the night was quiet, the fog dense. She was gone, or hiding, or waiting to be invited back in. The next morning, I woke to a trail of wet footprints across the floor, small, bare, leading from the front door to the fireplace. The rug was soaked. I hadn't heard a thing. No footsteps, no creak of hinges, just the quiet hum of the rain, steady and endless. I followed the trail to the hearth and found something resting in the ashes. A single silver necklace, still warm, to the touch. I didn't recognize it, but somehow it felt familiar, like something I'd given away long ago. The footprints vanished near the base of the firewood pile. No sign of an exit, no broken window. Nothing out of place except the impossible trail of water and the necklace glinting softly in my hand. I stood there for a long time, listening. The fire had gone out. The cabin felt smaller somehow, closer, as if its walls were pulling inward. I placed the necklace in my pocket and turned slowly toward the hallway. I could feel the door beneath the cabin breathing again. That night, I didn't wait for the whisper. I sat in the dark, listening to the rain and watching the window. And there she was, just after midnight, standing in the same place beneath the trees, her face now fully visible. She looked calm, sad, and when I blinked, She raised her hand and pointed once more. To the lake. Not the basement, not the cabin. This time, she was telling me where to go next, where the truth had always been waiting. The lake was still, not calm, still, as though frozen in time, untouched by the wind, unmoved by the rain that continued to fall softly through the morning haze. I stood on the dock just beyond the cabin, boots slick with algae and old wood. The water reflected nothing, not the sky, not the trees, not even me. It was like staring into an eye that refused to blink. In my pocket, the silver necklace grew colder, as if reacting to the lake's silence. I leaned forward, trying to peer into the water, but the surface remained dark. No ripples, no light, just blackness. I thought of her, how she had pointed, not to the house, not to the forest, but here, this place, this silence. I whispered her name, though I wasn't sure I'd ever known it. My voice disappeared into the mist. And then, very softly, the water responded, not with movement, but with sound. A whisper, a voice beneath the surface, speaking words I couldn't understand. It was low at first, like wind trapped beneath glass. Then it grew louder, layered, many, voices speaking at once in different tones, some high, some guttural, none quite human. I stepped back instinctively, nearly slipping. The sound stopped. My breath came fast and sharp. The necklace in my pocket was vibrating now, ever so slightly. I pulled it out and held it in my palm. It pointed, subtly, toward the far side of the lake. Not magnetism, not wind. Intention. I followed its direction with my eyes. There, half hidden in the fog, I saw it. What looked like the top of a stone structure barely breaking the surface of the lake. A square shape, unmoving, covered in moss. Something old, something sunken. I'd never noticed it before. But I also realized I had never truly looked. The voices didn't return, but the lake no longer felt silent. It felt expectant, like it had shown me what I needed to see, and was now waiting for my answer. I walked the perimeter of the shore, keeping my eyes fixed on the outline in the water. The rain fell gently on my hood, the sound almost soothing now, a rhythm I'd grown used to. When I reached the clearing that faced the structure directly, I found something I didn't expect. A man, seated on an overturned boat, dressed in a worn coat, fishing rod in hand. He didn't turn to look at me. He just spoke, quiet and calm. You shouldn't be listening to them. They only whisper to the ones who are too far gone. I hesitated, unsure if he was real or another vision shaped by sleepless nights and too many questions. He sat still, back slightly hunched, his line dangling motionless in the water. I stepped closer and asked, "Who are you?" He didn't answer right away, just exhaled slowly, as if the act of speaking required more than air. Then he said, "Names don't hold much here. They get washed away." His voice was rough, but not unkind, like gravel smoothed by rain. I glanced at the lake again, at the stone structure barely visible in the fog. "What is that?" I asked. This time he turned his head just enough for me to see the side of his face, creased with age, eyes pale and tired. "Foundation," he replied. "Old place. They tried to build over something that didn't want covering." He looked back at the water. "It remembers, especially during rain." I wanted to ask more, but something about his tone made me pause. He wasn't warning me. He was grieving. "Did you lose someone?" I asked. He didn't nod, didn't speak, just reeled in his line, slowly, mechanically. No bait, no hook, just a frayed end that had never been meant to catch anything. "They come here," he said at last, "when they've been forgotten. When the house stops speaking and the water starts calling. Some people go to it, others get pulled." He let the line drop again and stood. "Be careful what you answer. Not every voice down there wants to be remembered." With that, he walked away, disappearing into the trees without another word. I stood alone on the shore, watching the stone in the water. The rain thickened slightly, making it shimmer. I took the necklace from my pocket again. It still pointed toward the submerged structure. My heart pounded with something I couldn't name. Fear, maybe, but also recognition. Like the part of me that had come here for silence now, understood it had arrived for something else entirely. I knelt by the edge of the lake, the mud soft beneath my knees, and leaned forward until my reflection met mine. For a moment, I saw nothing strange, just my face, wet with rain, eyes hollow from restless nights. Then it changed. My reflection smiled. I didn't. The image held, still and calm, before melting slowly into ripples. And in its place, the pale face of the woman surfaced. Her eyes were open. Her mouth didn't move. But somehow, I heard her whisper clearly, "You left me there." I stumbled backward, falling into the wet grass, the whisper still echoing in my ears. The lake returned to stillness, her face gone, the reflection once again my own, though now it looked even less like me. I sat there, breath shallow, hands gripping the earth. "You left me there." The words circled like a current, dragging memories I couldn't quite place to the surface. I had never been to this lake before, not truly, and yet something inside me said otherwise. I stood slowly, heart thudding in rhythm with the falling rain. My clothes clung to my skin, heavy with water and tension. I walked back toward the cabin without looking over my shoulder, afraid that if I did, she might still be watching from beneath the surface. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. I expected the fire to be out, but it still crackled softly, as if it had never stopped. The air smelled faintly of lake water again, even though I had left the door closed behind me. I checked the Guestbook out of instinct. The drawer was still shut, the pan still wedging it closed. But I opened it anyway. The book was there, dry. I flipped through the pages quickly. No new entries, no new messages. And yet, on the table beside it sat something that hadn't been there before. A smooth black stone, wet, cold, with a faint carving on one side. A symbol I didn't recognize. 3 lines crossing through a circle. It felt wrong in my hand. Sharp, even though its edges were smooth. I placed the stone on the windowsill and turned away, trying not to let my thoughts spiral. But I couldn't stop wondering. Had she given it to me? Had I taken it from the lake without realizing? Or was it always meant to find me? That night, I didn't sit by the fire. I didn't read. I lay in bed fully clothed, flashlight at my side, listening to The wind twists through the chimney like a voice trying to find its shape. Sleep came only in fragments. In one of those fragments, I was standing at the edge of the lake again. The structure in the water was closer now, visible in full. A stone archway, half submerged, with steps descending into darkness. The woman stood beneath the arch, eyes fixed on me, her hands clasped in front of her chest. She didn't speak this time. She only tilted her head and slowly raised one hand, palm up, inviting me forward. Behind her, the water shimmered like glass, whispering without a voice. I jolted awake just before dawn, the sound of water dripping echoing in my ears even though the cabin was dry. For a moment, I couldn't move. The image of the archway, her raised hand, the silent pull of the lake, it all clung to me like fog. I rose slowly and walked to the window. The stone structure was clearer now, the fog lifting just enough to show the outline of stairs descending beneath the surface. As if it too had shifted closer during the night, I left the cabin without thinking, the wet earth soft beneath my boots, the sky a dull steel gray. The rain had paused, but the air remained heavy, the kind of stillness that comes just before something breaks. I made my way to the clearing where I'd spoken to the old fisherman, but he was gone. No footprints, no boat, only the lake and its impossible silence. I stood at the shore and waited, unsure for what, until the wind picked up and the whispers returned. They were clearer now, still overlapping, still fragmented, but words emerged. Come back. Come see. Below. They slid into my ears like old memories, familiar and wrong at the same time. The necklace around my neck, which I had put on without realizing, pulsed once against my chest. Not painful, but urgent. I took a step forward, my foot sinking slightly into the edge of the lake. The water didn't resist, it welcomed. Before I could go further, something brushed my ankle beneath the surface. I jumped back, heart leaping, eyes scanning the water, but there was nothing there, only ripples where the contact had been. I crouched and peered into the shallows. Beneath the surface, I saw not rocks or fish, but stairs, wide, smooth, descending into darkness. They hadn't been there before, or perhaps I hadn't been ready to see them. I backed away slowly, not from fear, but from the understanding that the lake had just opened something for me. I returned to the cabin without speaking, without thinking. The whispers faded behind me, replaced by the steady patter of rain beginning again. The stone on the windowsill was gone. The fire had reignited itself. And on the floor, just inside the door, were a new set of footprints, bare, wet, and leading not from outside, but from the lake-facing window. She had been here. Or maybe she had never left. And deep, inside, I knew the time to follow her was coming. I woke with the sound of paper rustling, not from outside, not blown by wind, from inside the cabin. I sat up slowly, the morning dim with overcast light. The rain had paused again, replaced by a thick humidity that made every surface feel damp. The sound came again, pages flipping, quick and deliberate. I followed it into the kitchen, flashlight in hand, and there on the table sat the Guestbook, open, turning its own pages as if a breeze moved through it, though the windows were closed. I approached slowly, heart pounding, and watched as the pages stopped turning on their own. It settled near the middle of the book, on a page that hadn't existed before. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise, delicate, and oddly slanted, like someone unused to writing in this world. She returns when remembered. She stays when written. Below it, a list of names, crossed out, one by one. 10, 20, maybe more. At the bottom of the list, beneath a long ink line, was a single new entry. My name. I hadn't written it. I hadn't touched the book since I'd hidden it days ago. Yet there it was, ink fresh, letters sharp. I whispered my own name aloud, testing it against the silence. Nothing answered, nothing moved. But I felt something behind me shift, an unseen presence stepping just outside my vision. I turned quickly. No one. Just the fireplace flickering. And yet, for the first time, I wondered if the cabin itself had started remembering me too. I closed the book and held it in my hands. Suddenly, aware of its weight, it felt heavier than before, as if the names inside had substance, had never really left. I flipped through pages at random. Notes from past guests. Beautiful view. Quiet and peaceful. Something strange in the water. The further I went back, the more unstable the entries became. Scrawled messages, scribbles, desperate pleas like "don't look in the mirror" and "she's still in the walls." One page was entirely covered in fingerprints. Wet. I turned to the final page. Blank. Except for a small symbol etched in the lower right corner, the same as the one on the stone, a circle with 3 crossing lines. I traced it with my finger, and for a brief second I felt dizzy, off balance, like the room had shifted around me. I placed the guestbook back on the table and stepped away, trying to catch my breath. But on the wall above the fireplace, something new had appeared. A framed photo I hadn't seen before. In it, the cabin, and someone standing in the window. I stepped closer to the photograph, heart thudding. The image was black and white, slightly faded, the kind of photo you'd expect to find in an old shoebox. The cabin looked identical to how it did now. Same crooked porch, same leaning chimney. But in the window just behind the glass was a face, pale, motionless, watching. I pressed my nose close to the frame, trying to discern detail, but the eyes were just dark smudges, and the mouth too still to be natural. I hadn't seen that photo before. I hadn't put it there. The frame was dusty, old, like it had always hung there. I removed it from the wall and turned it over. No writing, no label, just thin splinters where the nail had held it in place. I set it down on the floor, face down, and returned to the guest book. The page with my name was gone, not crossed out, not torn, just gone, as if it had never been there. In its place was a message written across the center of the page in heavy black ink. You're not the first to forget. I sat at the table, trying to calm myself, hands gripping the guest book as if it might offer some kind of anchor. I tried to think back. What I'd done since arriving, what I hadn't done. Could someone have added that entry without me knowing? Could I have written it in some kind of fugue? The more I tried to remember, the more my thoughts frayed. I could recall unpacking, making tea, staring out the window. But there were gaps. Hours lost. Whole nights without detail. I stood up too fast, the room spinning slightly. I stumbled toward the mirror in the hallway, the one I'd covered days earlier. I pulled the towel away and stared. My face looked older, more gaunt, eyes sunken, jaw tight. I leaned in and ran a hand across the glass. My reflection hesitated. Just for a second. I was sure of it. A subtle delay in movement. A flicker of something watching me through my own eyes. I dropped the towel and backed away, refusing to look again. The rain returned as a whisper, then a steady rhythm, tapping against the windows and roof like a familiar voice speaking in a language I had once understood. I sat by the fire and listened. The guestbook lay open on the floor beside me, its pages fluttering now without wind. On the hearth, the photo frame had turned over by itself, revealing the picture once more. And now, in the window of the cabin, there were two figures. I stared at the photo, my breath caught in my throat. Two figures now. The first was still at the window, pale, expressionless, but beside her stood a second shape, taller, darker, face obscured. The proportions were off, shoulders too high, arms too long. It stood unnaturally close to her, as if leaning in. I picked up the photo, blinking hard, trying to convince myself the image had always been this way. But something deep inside me knew better. It was changing, slowly, patiently, in real time. I flipped the frame over again, this time placing a book on top to keep it down. But the feeling lingered. That same pressure in the chest, that sense of being seen not with curiosity, but recognition. I sat on the couch, staring at the fire, until I realized the light had dimmed. Not flickered, dimmed. As if the shadows in the room had grown heavier, denser, drawn to corners that hadn't existed minutes before. I stood up, scanning the walls. One corner, near the hallway, was darker than the rest. Too dark. I stepped closer, flashlight raised, and the beam seemed to bend as it hit the space. The light didn't penetrate. It stopped, as if absorbed. I reached forward slowly and felt nothing. No cold, no texture. Just absence. The air buzzed faintly around my hand. Then, a soft creak behind me. I turned, and the guestbook was closed again. A single word written in black ink across the cover. Stay. My name had returned beneath it, crossed out in red. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I stepped back, eyes scanning the room for movement. Everything looked still, but the silence had shifted, not empty, held, like breath waiting to be released. I picked up the book, my hands trembling, and flipped to the last page. Another list. Not names this time, dates. Dozens of them, spanning decades. The final date was today. No explanation. Just the day I had opened the door and descended into the basement. A soft tapping pulled my attention back to the front of the cabin. I turned toward the main window and saw her again, the woman in the pale dress. She stood closer now, almost touching the glass, her eyes clearer. She raised one hand slowly and placed it against the window pane. Her mouth moved, forming 3 silent words. I stepped closer, reading her lips. Let me in. The lights flickered, and behind her, I saw the tall figure watching too. I stepped back from the window instinctively, the air thickening with each second I hesitated. Her face didn't move, but her hand stayed pressed to the glass. as if she were waiting for my permission, like she couldn't come in unless I agreed. My mind raced, trying to understand. What was she? A warning? A memory? A lure? The tall figure behind her remained still, its outline shifting like smoke. Not fully formed, but undeniably real. They were both waiting. I reached for the curtain, ready to close it and pretend none of it was happening. But before I could move, the lights in the cabin went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. The only illumination came from the fireplace's dying embers and the faint glow of the woman's face through the rain-drenched window. I stood frozen, heart hammering in my chest. Then came a whisper, not from the window this time, but from just behind me, a breath against my ear. "She wrote your name." I turned sharply, flashlight flickering in my grip, casting long shadows across the walls. No one there. But the guestbook had moved again. Now it lay open on the floor beside the front door. I approached slowly, each step creaking louder than the last. On the open page, written in that same delicate handwriting, "You let her in once." And just below it, a single line scratched into the page with something sharp. "You will again." I closed the book carefully, hands trembling, and placed it on the mantel above the fire. I didn't want to touch it again. I turned back toward the window. She was gone. So was the tall figure. Just darkness beyond the glass, and the slow return of the rain, falling steady and rhythmic like a ticking clock. I walked through the cabin slowly, room to room, checking every door, every shadow. Nothing had changed, and yet I felt certain something was already inside. That night, I didn't dream. I simply closed my eyes and listened to the rain, to the wood settling, to the whisper beneath it all that never truly stopped. The guest book remained closed. The photo stayed face down. But I knew it wouldn't last. The cabin remembered. The lake remembered. And now I did too. Some names aren't written to be kept. They're written to be called. And someone, or something, was still calling mine. The morning light was gray again, filtered through a sky that hadn't shown its full face since I arrived. I moved through the cabin slowly, unsure of what was memory and what had simply always been. The photo was still face down. The guest book hadn't moved. But there was something new in the air, an energy, a vibration beneath the silence. The kind of stillness that isn't peace, but waiting. Something beneath the floor seemed to pulse faintly with it. I no longer questioned whether I was alone. That day, I stayed inside. I sat near the fire, flipping through old books from the shelf. Water-stained novels, dusty collections of poetry, and one strange leather-bound volume with no title on the cover. Inside were notes, margins filled with handwriting. Some pages had lines underlined 3 or 4 times, always the same phrases. It always begins with forgetting. The mirror shows only what remains. When the lake opens, the house closes. I turned the last page and found a name scribbled in the corner. Elias R. That name caught in my chest. I didn't know why, but it felt important, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. I searched the guest book for it. Nothing. I checked the faded photos under the coffee table. No label, no name. And yet, the name wouldn't leave me. I whispered it aloud, and the cabin creaked as if in answer, not randomly. Directly above me, a single groan from the ceiling boards. One long exhale of old wood and older memory. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way to the loft. I'd barely gone up there since arriving. It was little more than a platform, with a twin bed, a small dresser, and an angled ceiling that pressed down like a heavy hand. The air was stale, untouched. But in the corner, half tucked beneath the bed frame, I saw a box. Cardboard, water-stained. I pulled it out slowly and lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Old, tied with black ribbon. All addressed to Elias R.I. untied the ribbon, my fingers trembling. The first letter was dated nearly 40 years ago. It was written in looping cursive, hard to read in places where the ink had blurred. But one line stood out. She started appearing again, at the window, the same night, the same face. I don't know if it's her or just the house remembering her. Another letter. The door opened by itself again. I locked it. I know I did. I kept reading, and one truth became clear. Elias had lived here. He had seen her too, and I was following his steps. I read through a half dozen of Elias's letters before I realized I was holding my breath. Each one was dated a week apart, as if he were writing them during a long stay, just like mine. The tone shifted as the letters went on. Curiosity gave way to dread, then to something colder. In one note, he wrote, "The dreams have stopped. Now she speaks only while I'm awake." In another, "I tried to leave. The road was gone." I flipped through them with growing unease, recognizing in his fear the shape of my own. One letter stood out. It was thinner than the rest, the paper nearly transparent, the ink faded to a dusty red. No greeting, just a single line. "If you're reading this, it's already too late. The house only echoes what it's already taken." I dropped the letter as if burned. The fire popped loudly behind me, though I hadn't fed it in hours. I turned back toward the loft stairwell, suddenly afraid that if I looked away, the cabin might change again. Walls shifting behind my back, doors no longer where they had been. I carried the box of letters downstairs and placed it on the coffee table beside the guestbook. I wanted to compare handwriting, cross names, find some logic. But as I opened the guestbook, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The page where my name had appeared, then disappeared, was back. My name was still there, but now, beside it, in faint script, echoing Elias. The ink shimmered faintly, as though still wet. I reached out to touch it. My fingertip came back smudged. I moved to the window, heart hammering, needing light, distance, anything to break the claustrophobia. Rain again. Thicker this time. Heavy drops that blurred the lake into a moving sheet of gray. And there, in the fog, two figures, standing side by side. The woman, as always, pale and still. But now, Elias? It had to be. Same outline I saw in the mirror once. Same code as in the photo that kept reappearing. He didn't move. Neither of them did, but they were looking at me. I backed away from the glass. A gust of wind struck the side of the cabin, hard enough to rattle the walls. The fire guttered low. On the table, the guestbook closed on its own. The letters shifted slightly, as if caught in a breath. I didn't open them again. I knew what they said. The house wasn't just haunted by ghosts. It was haunted by repetition, by memory, by echoes, and somehow I was being folded into the pattern. Just another voice repeating through the wood and stone. I spent the rest of the afternoon pacing the cabin, unable to sit still. Every creak beneath my feet sounded rehearsed, like steps I'd already taken. I returned to the hallway mirror, pulling the towel off once more. My reflection stared back, tired, hollow-eyed, but it moved as I moved. For now. I leaned close and whispered, "Elias," just to hear the name aloud. Nothing changed. No flicker. But I felt it. The tiniest pull, like something on the other side was listening. At dusk, I found myself drawn to the basement again. I didn't plan it. I just realized I was standing before the door, hand on the knob. The chair I had placed to block it days ago was gone. Not moved. Gone. The door was unlocked. I opened it slowly, flashlight already in hand. The air below was colder than I remembered, heavy with moisture and the faint scent of burned wood. I descended slowly, the beam flickering across the stone steps, expecting the carved words to greet me again. But the writing was gone. Where once had been, "We hear you," now there was only smooth, dark stone, as though it had never been touched. The shelf was empty. The strange artifacts, the photograph, all vanished. In their place stood a single object on the floor, a small wooden box, identical to the one I'd found in the drawer when I discovered the basement key. I crouched beside it, every part of me screaming not to touch it. I opened it anyway. Inside, a cassette tape, labeled in shaky handwriting, "Elias Final." I stared at it, heart hammering, throat dry. There was no recorder in the cabin that I'd seen. But as I turned, I noticed something new. An old tape player on the shelf near the stairs, covered in dust, but intact, plugged in, as if it had always been there. I inserted the tape, pressed play, and closed my eyes. The sound hissed to life. Then, his voice. Quiet. Fractured. Resigned. Day 32. I think she wants me to take her place. I sank to the floor as the voice continued, each word drawing blood from some forgotten place in me. I tried to warn the next ones, tried to write it down. But the house changes the words. It always changes the words. He paused, then whispered, "I see myself outside now, standing with her, smiling. But I'm in here too, still here, still trying." The tape clicked, stopped, ejected itself, and from upstairs, the hallway floor creaked. Footsteps. Mine. I stood frozen at the base of the stairs, heart racing, flashlight trembling in my grip. The creaking above continued. Slow, deliberate steps crossing the hallway just outside the basement door. They stopped directly overhead. I switched off the light and listened, straining through the silence. Then, a new sound. Not footsteps. Breathing. Shallow. Steady. No more than a few feet away. As if someone stood at the top of the stairs, waiting for me to return. But I hadn't moved. I couldn't. I whispered, "Elias," hoping the name might break the pattern, unlock something. The breathing stopped. Silence swelled again, deeper this time, pressing against my ears like water. Then, 3 slow knocks on the basement door. Not urgent, not angry, just Confirmation. I backed into the shadows, unsure what to do. Then the door creaked open on its own. Dim light from the hallway stretched down the stairs like a hand. And in its center stood a shape. Tall, still, too dark to be real. I blinked, and it was gone. No footsteps retreating. No slam of the door. Just empty space at the top of the stairs and the weight of something having been there. I climbed slowly, step by step, until I reached the main floor again. Everything looked unchanged, but it wasn't. I could feel it. The air was thicker. The walls leaned closer. The photo above the fireplace had returned, now showing 3 figures in the cabin window. The woman, the tall figure, and me. The guest book sat open on the floor, pages fluttering despite the still air. I approached and saw a new message scrawled across both pages in looping ink. You can't leave what remembers you. The entry below it was dated. Today. My name, followed by a simple phrase. He opened the door. He looked back. I closed the book and stepped away. But the air didn't feel like mine anymore. I was no longer a guest here. I was becoming something else. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, watching the shadows twist along the ceiling. The mirror reflected things I hadn't done. The guest book wrote itself. And when the rain began again at midnight, I walked to the window. The lake was glowing faintly. On the far shore, they waited. Her, Elias, and the figure with no name. I raised my hand, and this time, they all waved back. Not to welcome me, but to acknowledge I was already part of the story. The morning came without light. Thick clouds smothered the sky, turning everything a dull slate gray. The rain hadn't stopped. It had changed. Heavier now, more deliberate, like it was meant to soak through bone. I didn't open the curtains. I didn't need to. I could feel them outside, waiting. Not with violence, but with patience. Like a ritual half complete, paused only until I played my part. I moved through the cabin in silence, each room now strange and familiar in equal measure. The guest book was gone. I searched for it out of instinct, but I already knew I wouldn't find it. In its place, a circle of ash on the coffee table. Black and perfect. No sign of flame. No smell of smoke. I touched it gently, and it collapsed beneath my fingers like old paper. Beneath the ash, carved into the wood, was a new symbol. An eye, open, with a tear falling from its center. I didn't recognize it, but somehow it recognized me. I went to the mirror. The towel I'd placed over it was folded neatly on the floor, as if someone had taken care not to wake me. My reflection stared back, but my clothes were different. Damp. Torn. As if I had been walking through the lake. My face was hollow, my mouth slightly open like I was whispering something I couldn't hear. I raised my hand. The reflection didn't follow. It just kept staring. I covered it again without another glance. Drawn by something I couldn't name, I returned to the basement. The air grew colder with each step, not from temperature, but intention. The stone walls had changed. Symbols covered them now. Circles, lines, eyes, spirals. Some drawn, others carved deep. At the center of the floor, the wooden box remained. I hadn't left it there. I had brought it up, burned it, I was sure of it. But there it was again, clean, whole, waiting. The tape was inside, labeled differently now. Begin again. I didn't play it. I didn't need to. The room had already begun to speak. A low hum vibrated through the walls, like chanting too deep to be voiced. A dark stain spread slowly from the center of the floor, forming another symbol, different from the rest. A spiral leading inward. I stood at its edge, breathing shallow, and for the first time I heard her voice clearly. Not a whisper, not an echo. A sentence spoken inside my mind. You made a promise beneath the rain. The voice settled into me like fog, soft but impossible to shake. I looked around the basement, feeling the stone press inward, the walls almost breathing. The spiral on the floor pulsed faintly with a dull red light, like an ember buried in ash. I stepped closer, and the hum grew louder. Not painful, just deep, like it had been going on forever, and I was only now tuning in. I knelt at the edge of the symbol without thinking, hands trembling, unsure of what part I was meant to play. That's when the firelight returned, though I hadn't lit anything. Around the room, along the base of the walls, candles now flickered, each in a carved niche I hadn't noticed before. The flames danced without sound, casting moving symbols across the stone. And in their glow, I saw more than shadows. I saw faces, not physical, reflections maybe, echoes, Elias, the woman, others I didn't recognize, all watching in silence from within the stone itself. Their expressions blank, not angry, not pleading, just present. In the far corner of the basement, something shifted. I turned and saw the tunnel again, the narrow passage I'd crawled through before. But now it was wider, the stone smooth and wet, as if freshly carved. Water trickled along, its edges whispering in its own strange language. At the entrance, a single object sat waiting. The silver necklace I thought I'd lost days ago, now glinting softly in the candlelight. I stepped forward and picked it up. Warm, beating, like a second heart. A choice lingered in the air, unspoken, but undeniable. I could follow the tunnel. I could see where it led. Or I could return upstairs, pretend none of this had happened, close every door and window and wait for time to forget me. But something deeper pushed me forward. Not curiosity, not bravery, a sense of debt. As if this was not the first time I had stood here, as if the spiral had been written from my steps long before I ever entered the cabin. I placed the necklace around my neck and stepped into the tunnel. The stone was cold, slick beneath my hands as I moved forward on hands and knees. The chanting faded, the air thickened, and then, light ahead. A chamber, hidden far beneath the cabin, circular with a pool of dark water at its center. Symbols surrounded it on every wall, glowing faintly. And on the far side of the pool she stood, pale, serene, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. "You came back," she said. Her voice didn't echo in the chamber. It settled, like something spoken in thought instead of sound. She stood barefoot at the edge of the pool, her dress soaked at the hem, hair clinging to her shoulders as if it had never dried. I couldn't speak. I just stared, my breath shallow, chest tight. She looked younger now than before, or maybe older. Her face didn't hold an age, just weight, memory. She lifted one hand and gestured toward the water. "It won't hurt, if you remember." I stepped closer, the sound of my movements swallowed by the chamber. The water was impossibly still, black as glass. I knelt at its edge, and for a moment saw no reflection, just depth, infinite, waiting. I asked finally, "What am I supposed to remember?" Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but sadness. "That you came willingly once before, that you were the first to open the door." I shook my head, backing away slightly. "That's not possible." But the truth bloomed in my chest like a bruise. I didn't know what I had forgotten. She turned from me then, kneeling at the opposite side of the pool, her fingers hovering just above the surface. The water responded to her presence, rippling outward, revealing images beneath. Faces I recognized. Elias. Myself. Others I'd seen in dreams, all gathered in the same chamber, performing the same act. Some afraid, some calm, some crying, all of them kneeling, all of them offering something. And in the center of it all, always, her. Not as prisoner, not as monster, as witness. I watched as the ripples shifted again, revealing the cabin, decades ago, being built above this place. Men laying stone over the spiral, a woman watching from the trees. Then rain, endless rain. A door opening where there had been none. Over and over, a loop without a beginning. The water showed everything. My breath caught as I saw one final image. Myself, standing at the cabin window, looking out. Long before I had ever arrived. Wearing the same coat, the same face. But older, worn, knowing. I staggered back from the pool, every part of me trembling. "What is this place?" I asked, voice raw. The woman turned to face me again, expression soft, almost kind. "It is what remains of promises. A place built by forgetting, maintained by returning." She stepped forward, the water parting, for her without sound. "You've returned, so it can begin again." I looked down and saw the spiral forming at my feet, glowing, turning, not to trap me, but to bring me back in. The chamber darkened as she approached, not from the absence of light, but from the weight of something older settling into the air. The spiral beneath my feet pulsed gently, like it was sinking to my heartbeat. I tried to speak again, but my mouth felt dry, disconnected. She extended her hand, not forcefully, not demanding. It was an offering. And in that moment, I remembered something. Not a scene, not a voice, but a feeling. I had stood here before. I had taken her hand. I had begun this. The realization struck like a wave, not reincarnation, not possession, just repetition. A ritual etched into the fabric of this place. I had come willingly once, long ago, carrying grief and guilt and questions. I had joined the others, left part of myself behind, then forgotten. But the lake doesn't forget. The cabin doesn't forget. They wait. They whisper. They call us back again and again until we remember. Until we complete what we once promised to finish. I stepped forward and took her hand. It was warm, human, solid. She smiled faintly, not joyfully, but with relief. The spiral flared beneath us, and the pool rippled in concentric rings. Images returned, glimpses of faces, places, moments torn out of time. I saw the fisherman. I saw Elias. I saw her, waiting at countless windows. I saw myself standing at the lake's edge, century after century, each version of me a little closer to remembering. And now, it was time. She led me into the pool. The water rose, cool but not cold, swallowing my steps without resistance. It climbed to my knees, then waist, then chest. When it reached my neck, I looked into her eyes one last time. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a breath. She answered without moving her lips. "Now you stay, so the next can return." I closed my eyes. The water took me, but I did not drown. I remembered. Somewhere above, in the cabin, a floorboard creaked. The fire reignited itself. The guestbook opened to a fresh page. Outside, the rain continued, steady and eternal. And at the lake's edge, a new figure approached. Soaked, uncertain, eyes scanning the water. Inside the cabin, the mirror began to ripple, and from the window, a woman in a pale dress watched in silence. The cycle had begun again. The house was awake, and I was part of it now. The sound of rain was the first thing I heard when I opened my eyes, steady, unbroken, like a heartbeat buried beneath water. The cabin looked unchanged, but the air felt older, heavier, as though the walls had aged in my absence. I sat up on the couch, clothes dry, fire already lit. The guestbook rested on the table, open to a blank page, and near the window, faint footprints marked the floor. Bare, wet, fresh. Someone had come in, or someone had never left. Outside, the lake stretched into fog, its surface restless beneath the downpour. I moved to the window, half expecting to see her again, or Elias, or the faceless figure that had once followed me in dreams. But no one stood at the tree line. Only the water stirred, disturbed by something below. Ripples formed without a center, expanding outward in waves that never ended. The sky above was colorless, the trees unmoving. The world was waiting, holding its breath. I walked through the cabin, touching familiar objects. The guestbook, the fire iron, the drawer with the wooden box that should have been gone. Everything was exactly where it shouldn't be. The mirror had uncovered itself. The photo above the fireplace now showed 4 figures in the window. The newest one was blurred, indistinct, as if still forming. I knew it was the one who had just arrived. The one drawn here by the rain, the whispers, and the memory that hadn't yet surfaced. I found a note pinned to the inside of the bedroom door, written in my handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it. If they knock, don't speak. If they call, don't answer. If they weep, don't pity them. The ink was smeared as if someone had touched it with shaking hands. I reread the words, then folded the paper and placed it in the guestbook. The act felt familiar, like I was preserving something for the next, like I had done it before. At noon, the door creaked open, not violently, but with careful, deliberate motion. A draft of cold, damp air curled into the room. I approached slowly, but found no one outside, only footprints leading from the lake to the porch and then vanishing at the threshold. I didn't step out. I couldn't. The rain had become too loud now, like voices layered on top of each other. I closed the door gently and whispered to no one in particular. "How long have I been here?" The house answered with silence. But the rain never stopped. That evening, I lit the lantern and placed it by the window, the way I remembered Elias had done in the vision. I wasn't sure why. Maybe to signal the next, maybe to honor the past. The flame flickered weakly at first, then steadied as if recognizing its purpose. Outside, lightning cracked in the distance, but there was no thunder. Only the echo of water striking the roof, walls, glass, like the entire cabin was sinking slowly into the memory of something it could never forget. I returned to the basement, drawn by a quiet pressure behind my ribs. The spiral was still etched into the stone, no longer glowing, but unmistakably present. The candles had gone out. Their wax melted in strange, asymmetrical patterns along the walls. At the center of the floor was a mirror I hadn't seen before. Oval, antique, its surface dark and shifting, as if reflecting something behind me rather than what was real. I stepped in front of it. My face stared back, then smiled. I hadn't smiled. I stepped back. The image held for a moment too long, then changed, ripples forming across the glass like disturbed water. Within it, I saw another version of the cabin, one with boarded windows, a fire long dead, a guestbook filled to the final page, and someone else walking through its halls, someone who hadn't yet looked in the mirror. I blinked, and the image faded, replaced by my reflection again, silent, waiting, older than before. Back upstairs, the guestbook was open once more. A new entry had appeared in the same slanted handwriting as always. The rain is not a storm, it is a door. Below it, a crude drawing of the cabin, surrounded by endless water. I traced the lines with my finger and realized the shape of the lake was not natural. It was circular, perfect, like something man-made, like something designed to hold something in, or keep something out. I stepped outside just before midnight, lantern in hand, drawn to the lake's edge. The rain soaked through my clothes instantly, but I didn't care. The surface of the water churned now, restless. At its center, the stone structure rose higher than ever before, fully visible for the first time. I saw the archway again, the spiral. And at its base, the woman waited. She looked up at me, her face unreadable, and raised her hand once more. But this time she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a second figure, taller, broader, draped in darkness that moved like smoke in the rain. I couldn't make out a face, but I felt its gaze cut through the storm. Not hostile, not welcoming, just aware. It placed one hand on her shoulder, and she didn't flinch. Instead, she turned slightly, looking back toward the archway as if expecting someone else to arrive. Then, together, they stepped aside, revealing the entrance beneath the stone. Open now, lit from within, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the lake. I took a single step toward the water and felt the ground shift beneath me. The rain thickened, falling sideways, spinning like mist. The trees surrounding the lake bent with the force of something unseen. I raised the lantern, and its flame stretched toward the archway, as if drawn to it. Then came the sound again. Not thunder, not wind, but whispers layered in rhythm. Come, Come, come. I didn't know if they were calling to me, or through me. I turned back toward the cabin, half expecting it to be gone. But it stood still, lights on, window open. And in the window, I saw my own reflection staring out. But I wasn't inside. I was here, standing in the rain. I blinked. The reflection raised its hand in sync with mine, then tilted its head, not as a mirror would, but opposite, as if curious about which one of us was real. Then it vanished, leaving only the empty glow of the room behind the glass. I returned inside, drenched, boots leaving muddy prints across the floor. The mirror in the hallway was uncovered again. I avoided it. I didn't want to see what might be waiting there. The guest book now lay closed with a small key resting atop it. I didn't recognize the key, but I knew exactly what it opened. The door beneath the bed in the loft. The one I hadn't dared to touch since finding Elias's letters. I climbed the stairs slowly, the air colder with every step. At the top, the room had changed. The bed was gone. In its place, a trapdoor lay wide open, the wood around it soaked as if leaking from below. The air smelled of the lake, brine, rot, something floral and dying. I held the key tight in my fist, though the lock was already broken. As I looked into the darkness beneath the floor, I heard her voice again, closer, clearer. If the rain brought you, the rain can take you back. I descended through the trapdoor slowly, the wooden steps slick with moisture. The space below wasn't like the basement. It was narrower, more organic, as if the cabin had grown downward into the earth rather than been built into it. Roots snaked along the walls, pulsing faintly with a rhythm that mirrored the rain above. The air was thicker here, saturated with memory. I felt it pressing into my skin, whispering beneath my breath, filling me with names I didn't recognize, but somehow remembered. At the end of the narrow passage, I emerged into a stone chamber I hadn't seen before. The ceiling was low, dripping steadily. At its center stood a shallow stone basin filled with rainwater. Floating on the surface were pieces of paper, fragments of old journal pages, torn photographs, guestbook entries, all soaked and disintegrating. I leaned closer, and beneath the water, I saw words written directly into the stone beneath. To forget is mercy. To remember is to stay. I turned to leave, but the passage behind me had vanished. Where the door had been, there was only wet stone. The chamber grew darker, though I still held the lantern. Its flame flickered violently now, as if in protest. Then I heard it. Steps above me. On the floorboards. Someone walking through the cabin, not pacing, moving with purpose. I backed into the corner, clutching the lantern like a lifeline. The ceiling creaked. Then a voice I didn't expect. My own. Calling out, "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched like a wire. I didn't answer. Couldn't. I knew what it meant. Somewhere above, another version of me had arrived. Following the same steps, seeing the same symbols, dreaming the same dreams. I pressed my forehead against the cold stone and whispered, "Don't come down here." But I knew he wouldn't hear it. The rain had already chosen him, and the house had already begun rearranging itself for his arrival. I blew out the lantern. Let the dark take me. Let the water in the basin still. Let the spiral beneath the lake turn again. The cycle wasn't punishment. It was memory made real. A ritual of return. of recognition. And above me, the rain fell steady, eternal, as a new knock echoed through the cabin door. Not a warning, not a threat, just the next page, waiting to be written, by someone who thought they had just arrived. There is no sense of time beneath the cabin. No sunlight, no sound of birds or wind. Only the steady, measured pulse of dripping water and the faint hum of something ancient vibrating in the stone. I don't remember how long I've been here. Days, maybe. Or hours that stretch like years. My notebook is soaked through. My lantern long dead. But I still hear them walking above. Light footsteps at first, then heavier, slower, as if someone is beginning to understand they're not alone. The basin in the center of the chamber now holds more than water. Words continue to appear on the stone below its surface. Sentences I don't write but recognize. She was here before the cabin. The house was built to hold her. The lake is the mouth, the cabin is the tongue. Each time I read them, I forget something else. A name, a face, a season. The water does not reflect anymore. It absorbs. And in it, I see her eyes. She doesn't speak when she visits. She sits beside the basin with me, barefoot, her dress trailing along the damp floor like it's part of the room. Sometimes she hums. Not a melody, but a vibration that settles into the walls. I try not to ask questions. I already know the answers. She is not here to guide. She is here to witness. And witnessing, I've come to understand, is the only thing that keeps this place alive. There are markings now across my skin, not injuries, not symbols, imprints, like echoes of things I once held or once promised. A spiral over my chest, a line crossing my left palm. I don't remember receiving them. They simply appeared, like the carvings on the walls, like the faces in the stone. Some nights, I hear chanting in my own voice, though my lips do not move. Other nights, I see the door open upstairs and watch myself walk out, or back in. The figure with no name visits, too. He stands in the tunnel just out of reach, tall and silent. The darkness around him always shifting. He never speaks, never moves closer. But I know his purpose. He is the space between forgetting and remembering. He is what you see when you try to leave too early. The reason most stay. The reason some never finish the spiral. And every time I look at him, I see less of my own face. There are tunnels now. More than before. Some are narrow and filled with roots. Others are wide and lined with carvings that seem to move when I'm not watching. I've followed several, but they all loop back eventually. To the basin, to the spiral, to her. The cabin above isn't a house. It's a map. Each floorboard, each creak, each window is a symbol pointing downward. I once believed I was being haunted. Now I understand. I was being drawn. The whispers are louder here. Not tormenting, not angry, just persistent. They speak in the voices of people I've never met but somehow mourn. A child humming lullabies. A woman reciting forgotten names. A man praying in a language I've never heard. They come from the walls, from the stones beneath my feet, from the water in my mouth when I drink. Sometimes I reply, not in words, but in memory. And when I do, the cabin shifts above me, groaning, realigning. I've begun writing on the walls. Not stories, not warnings, just fragments. Pieces of who I was. A line from a letter I once wrote. The final sentence I ever said to my mother. A single word I can't translate but remember feeling when I first saw the lake. The walls accept them, absorb them. I think it's how the others left pieces behind. Maybe that's what the cabin wants. Not flesh, not blood, but history, stories, echoes strong enough to carry forward. One of the tunnels led to a wooden door, ancient, warped, covered in runes I dared not touch. It had no knob, only a small circle at the center, hollow. I instinctively removed the necklace and placed it inside. The door didn't open. It dissolved. Beyond it, a room of mirrors awaited. Each one reflected a different version of me. Older, younger, fearful, angry, blank-eyed. But all were marked. All had taken the spiral. And every one of them looked directly at me and smiled. I ran. Not from fear, but from understanding. I stumbled back through the tunnels, through breathless corridors of dripping roots and humming stone. When I returned to the chamber, she was waiting again, kneeling by the basin, her hand outstretched, a word etched across her palm. Stay. I knelt beside her. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because deep beneath the cabin, in a place beyond rain and reason, I understood the truth. This was not a prison. It was a memory that refused to end. Sometimes I hear footsteps above, and wonder whose they are. Each set sounds different, hurried, cautious, curious. I picture them walking through the cabin as I once did, peering out rain-speckled windows, lighting the fire, touching the guestbook with hands that still believe they are alone. I no longer feel envy. I feel recognition. They are not intruders. They are reminders. That forgetting is easy. That remembering takes time. That I was once just as afraid of looking too closely. She speaks more often now, though never aloud. Her words arrive like breath in my lungs, soft and steady. You are close to finishing. I asked her once what that meant. What finishing could possibly look like in a place with no time, no doors that stay shut, no mirrors that tell the truth. Her response came not in language but sensation, a weight lifting, then returning heavier. Finishing is not leaving. She finally said, it's staying without forgetting why. I think about Elias often, not as a warning, but as a mirror. He stayed too, but not fully. Something in him clung to escape, to the idea that there was a door out if he just remembered the right path. But there is no out. There is only through. I wonder if he's still here, scattered in the walls, in the whispers, in the half-spoken names etched along the spiral. Maybe I've passed him in the tunnels. Maybe he's watching me now. The figure in the shadows no longer waits at the edge of the tunnel. It follows me closely now. I see it in the reflection of puddles, in the bend of the roots, in the smoke that never fades from the fire pit. Its presence doesn't bring fear anymore, only pressure, as if it's urging me toward a final decision, toward a moment that must happen again, but differently this time. This time, I must stay fully. This time, I must finish the spiral. Tonight, the rain above sounds different, sharper, hungrier. It doesn't fall anymore. It scrapes. like claws dragging across the roof of the world. I sit by the basin, fingers brushing the surface, waiting for the final image to appear. I know it's coming. I feel the cabin shifting one last time, preparing. And as I close my eyes, I see someone new walking toward the lake, lantern in hand. Reflection already wrong. It's almost time. The spiral is turning again. The sound of footsteps returns, softer now, measured, uncertain. The new one has entered. I can feel it. The floorboards creak above, not with weight, but with recognition. The cabin knows them, welcomes them, tests them. I listen carefully, tracking their path. From the front door to the window, from the window to the guest book, from the guest book to the hallway mirror. Each step retracing mine, each movement echoing a memory I once called my own. The guest book reappears beside me, soaked, yet legible. A new name has been added, ink still fresh, slightly smudged. No last name, just initials. That's how it begins. The book writes itself now. I flip through the pages and find my own name again. This time beneath a final sentence. He stayed for them. I don't remember writing that, but I know it's true. I stayed so the next wouldn't have to start blind, so they could see sooner, choose sooner, complete the spiral with open eyes. I've started hearing the lake from down here, not just feeling its weight, but hearing its movement. The water shifts above like something breathing, drawing in memories and exhaling silence. She told me once, in a voice that wasn't hers, that the lake is not deep in miles, but in time. It holds layers of those who came before, each ripple a life half remembered. I think I'm becoming one of those layers now, a pattern in the water, a name in the rain. The spiral beneath the basin glows again, brighter than before, its center now pulsing with something warm, alive. I sit at its edge, eyes closed, and feel everything all at once. The rain, the footsteps, the new reflection arriving in the mirror upstairs. The cabin breathes with me. The tunnel hums softly. The ritual doesn't demand obedience. It asks for understanding. And now, I understand. I will not stop the next from walking down, but I will be here when they do. The lights upstairs flicker. The door opens. Another knock. The rain thickens into song. And as I lower my hand into the water one last time, I whisper into the stone. Let them remember sooner. Because what lives beneath the cabin is not evil. It is memory. And the memory must be carried by someone willing to stay. The lake doesn't speak in words. It remembers in reflections. I stood at its edge once more, the rain falling harder than ever, soaking the earth, flattening the reeds, swallowing my footprints before I could make another. The archway was fully visible now, not sunken, not distant, present, as if it had always been waiting to rise. The spiral etched into its stone glowed faintly beneath the surface, and just beneath the ripples, I saw her face watching me again, calm and patient. This time I didn't hesitate. I stepped into the water, the cold sliding up my body like breath, wrapping around me instead of resisting. The path beneath the surface was smooth, Ancient stone stairs carved long before any map remembered this place. Each step downward brought clarity. Not visions, not voices, just the feeling of being remembered. The water welcomed me because I had finally stopped trying to leave it behind, because I had become what the lake had always known I would. When I reached the archway, the rain above stilled, not stopped, stilled, as if someone had pressed pause on the sky. The surface froze into a perfect mirror. For a moment, I stood between two worlds, above and below, past and present, forgetting and remembering. Then she stepped forward from the shadows beneath the stone, barefoot, her reflection forming in the water a second before her body emerged. She reached for my hand without speaking, and I gave it willingly. Together, we walked through the arch. The space beyond was not a chamber, not a tunnel. It was memory made solid, walls lined with moments. Windows of rain showing faces, scenes, choices made and unmade. I saw myself again and again, arriving, doubting, running, returning. I saw others too. Elias, the fisherman, the woman before the window. All of us bound not by blood or story, but by place, by the spiral, by the rain. None of us had ever truly left. We had only taken turns remembering. In the center of the space, a platform rose from the water, holding a book. Not the Guestbook, something older, covered in dark leather, its pages thick with age and moisture. She let go of my hand and stepped back. I approached the book alone, feeling its presence like a heartbeat. I opened it to a blank page, and the pen beside it moved without touch. It wrote a single sentence in my own handwriting. I am ready to stay. As the ink dried, I felt something loosen in my chest, an ache I hadn't known I carried. It wasn't pain. It was release, like letting go of a name I'd been trying to remember in a dream. I looked up and saw her watching from the water's edge. She nodded once, as if confirming what I'd always known deep down. This wasn't the end of a journey. It was the end of resistance. And when you stop resisting the rain, it teaches you how to remain. The chamber began to shift around me, not collapsing, not fading, but evolving. Walls gave way to fog. Reflections softened into memory. The lake above grew brighter, the surface now glowing as if touched by a moon I could not see. And then I heard footsteps, real ones, from the far side of the lake. A new arrival, soaking, wet, standing at the shore with wide eyes and a flashlight trembling in their grip. I knew them, not their name, but their pattern. They looked around as I once did, measured the cabin with suspicion, stepped toward the window, pressed their hand to the door. I didn't call out, I didn't warn them. That's not what we do here. The lake remembers because it must, and those who arrive must remember on their own, piece by piece, fragment by fragment. I stepped back into the shallows and watched their reflection take shape, still clear, still human, but already starting to ripple. Back inside the cabin, the fire relit itself, the mirror uncovered, the guestbook opened to a fresh page. I knew it would write soon. The rain tapped a familiar rhythm against the roof, one I finally understood. Not random, not storm, a lullaby. For those who stayed, too long. For those who forgot. For those who returned anyway. I dried my hands on the edge of my coat and placed the pen beside the book. knowing the next signature would come before morning. As I stood at the window, watching the new reflection drift closer, I whispered something I hadn't said since I arrived. "Welcome." And from somewhere deep within the cabin, in the spaces between stone and water, a voice answered. Not mine, not hers, but all of us. "We remember you, because the lake never forgets. The cabin never sleeps, and those who enter in the rain never truly leave." The reflection in the lake no longer showed clouds or trees or moonlight. It showed faces, layered, transparent, drifting just beneath the surface like petals floating in a bowl. Some were watching. Some had their eyes closed. One of them looked like me, but older, scarred, peaceful. I couldn't look away. I saw years that hadn't happened, choices I hadn't made, echoes of lives that had split and rejoined in this place, again and again. The water didn't offer answers. It offered continuity. I walked along the shore, my boots barely making a sound in the wet grass. The lantern beside the cabin door flickered in rhythm with my breath, its flame dimming only when I exhaled. I passed the window slowly, watching the new guest move inside with cautious curiosity. They paused at the fireplace, looked at the guestbook, picked it up with both hands. I remembered that weight. I remembered thinking it was just a book. How naive we always are at the beginning. Inside the mirror, my reflection still stood, but no longer mimicked me. It acted on its own, turning to walk deeper into the hallway, lantern in hand, back straight, purposeful. A guide now, not a warning. I watched it disappear into shadow and felt no fear. I understood, finally, what it meant to become part of the place, rather than trying to resist it. My body was still mine, but my story had joined the others, threaded into the wood, the stone, the pages. I sat once more by the hearth, the same place where I had waited for something to change. Only this time, I knew it wasn't the fire that had to move. It was me. The cabin was not a trap. It was a container, and everything it held had meaning. The footsteps in the hall, the child's laughter, the marks on the walls. They weren't hauntings. They were messages left behind by those who stayed long enough to remember why they came. The guestbook fluttered open on its own again. A new name appeared, unsteady, uncertain. Their handwriting shook. Below it, a sentence had already begun writing itself, as if the house knew the thought before the guest could voice it. "I think I've been here before." I smiled, leaning back in the chair, the warmth of the fire licking at my hands. I didn't need to answer. The cabin would. The lake would. The spiral had accepted another. That night, the rain fell softer, not weaker, like it had finished saying something. The cabin exhaled. The walls no longer creaked in warning, but in comfort. I walked through its rooms one final time, touching each doorknob, each frame, each piece of furniture with quiet reverence. Every surface held a trace of someone, a memory, a breath left behind. I wasn't here to leave. I was here to remain. And remaining meant carrying the stories forward, whether in silence or in shadow. In the loft, the trapdoor stood open again, inviting. I descended not out of duty, but with understanding. The spiral below no longer pulsed with urgency. It glowed, with calm. A still, steady light that didn't blind, but illuminated. I knelt beside it and placed my hand at its center. Beneath my fingers, warmth bloomed, not from heat, but from recognition, from acknowledgement, from the place itself whispering. You did not run, you remembered. The basin now reflected stars I could not see in the sky, constellations I didn't recognize, but felt were mine. I dipped both hands into the water and cupped them to my chest. It was cool, alive. I drank slowly, and for the first time I tasted not earth or moss, but time, seasons, voices, lives. I had never left this place. I had only wandered far enough to forget I belonged to it. The spiral wasn't a prison. It was a path home. As I rose, the chamber behind me shifted into quiet. The candles dimmed, the markings faded, the water stilled. I turned once more to the tunnel and saw the tall, dark figure waiting. But now, it was no longer formless, no longer hollow. It wore my face, my shape. It was me, stepping back into the story as the guide, as the whisper, as the one the next would see in flickering glass and dreams they wouldn't understand. Yet, I climbed the stairs slowly. Rain kissed the windows, the fire hummed, and as I stood in the doorway of the cabin once more, looking out toward the lake, I felt the story settle into place, not with an end, but with balance. The spiral didn't close. It widened. The door remained unlocked. The water remained still. And far off in the distance, beneath a sky that never cleared, another traveler approached through the fog, lantern in hand, heart full of questions, and a name the lake already knew. The rain does not fall to cleanse. It falls to remember. Each drop a whisper, each puddle a name that dared to be forgotten. The cabin does not trap, it holds. Walls heavy with breath, floorboards echoing the weight of footsteps taken too many times before. The lake is not water, it is memory, stretched wide beneath a sky that never clears. Its surface reflects only those willing to see what they left behind, and the spiral, it never ends. It turns not to bind, but to guide the lost back into their own reflection. So, if you come softly. Don't knock, don't ask, just listen. And if the house calls your name, answer only if you're ready to stay, and be remembered.